Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Carol Bernard, and I am the CEO of the Amara Legal Center. I want to welcome you to our third Circle of Hope speaker series, and we have today the fabulous Shamere McKenzie. Couple of housekeeping items before we get started. We will have an evaluation, as we always do with our speaker series, to get your feedback. We will put the link in the chat as we get closer to the end of the seminar. And please feel free to add your questions in our Q&A, and we will address those in the last 15 minutes. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Shamere. Shamere is a consultant, activist, subject matter expert on human trafficking, and a sought after, award-winning, internationally recognized speaker and trainer. Turning her past adversities into an opportunity to liberate and protect others, Shamere has brought about social and political change in America and around the world. She has a strong passion for education and policy and is the CEO for the Sungate Foundation, an anti-trafficking organization that provides educational opportunities for survivors of human trafficking. She also serves as the training manager for the National Human Trafficking Hotline and is the co-chair for the Victim Services Committee of the Maryland State Human Trafficking Task Force. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Kyla Woods, our Intake and Outreach Associate.
Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you so much, Shamere, for being with us as well. I am very, very excited. So especially as someone who has this background, both domestically and internationally, I really just want to dive in with your expertise as the anti-trafficking ambassador to Jamaica. I think that expertise is really unique. And so I just first want to start by just what is that landscape right now in the Caribbean, would you say? What are the issues that you see arising, for instance, specifically in Jamaica?
So when we talk about trafficking, right, whether it's domestic or international, there are some common denominators, right? Vulnerability, right? When people are vulnerable, they are prone, right? There's this ability for them to be trafficked because of their vulnerability. In the Caribbean, it's no different, right? In the Caribbean, where sometimes there's a lack of access to housing, education, some of the same opportunities, same vulnerabilities that we see here in the United States, it's the same in the Caribbean. When we talk about Jamaica, though, for which that's my home country, I have always wanted to go back and serve. And so when I was asked to be the anti-trafficking ambassador, that was definitely an honor and a privilege for me. In Jamaica, when we look at trafficking, we don't see a lot of pimp-controlled trafficking, right? So in the United States, we see trafficking manifested through, when we talk about sex trafficking, we see trafficking manifested in the United States through gang control or survival sex for the individuals who are under the age of 18, or gang control or familial. In Jamaica, it's primarily familial and gang trafficking, right? So that pimp control, where we have that single trafficker that's operating and controlling potential victims, that's not the case in Jamaica primarily. It's family members who are looking for a better opportunity for their children. Some of them are knowingly, right? So Shared Hope International was the first agency that got this grant from the Department of Justice to look at trafficking in Jamaica. And when they went, they did some undercover investigation, and you guys can pull this up on YouTube. And during that undercover investigation, they found that it was an uncle who was knowingly selling his 15-year-old niece, right? Knowingly, he knew what he was doing. He knew that he was selling her to make a profit. And even if you watch that video from so many years ago, he is saying, when the interviewer was asking, like, well, is the mother aware? The uncle said, the mother trusts me with her. The mother doesn't know that she's engaging in commercial sex, but the mother trust me with her. So that is the type of trafficking we're seeing where, you know, family members who are trying to make ends meet, parents who are trying to make ends meet would leave a child with someone they trust, right? Not to mention when we talk about vulnerabilities prior to being trafficked, there is a lot of child sexual abuse in Jamaica that is not highly talked about, right? It's like, oh, you're going to embarrass the family name, right? Which is similar to the United States too, right? But that is like, we see that when you look at majority of cases in Jamaica, there is always this primary, previous to their trafficking experience, there has been that child sexual abuse where they weren't believed, right? Or sometimes, you know, when we talk about the gang leaders, right, you're talking about the inner city gangs where this is the same gang leader that's paying for the light bill, that's paying the rent, that's paying to send that child to school. And so that gang leader that we refer to them in Jamaica as Dons, that Don will say to the mother, hey, send your daughter up to my house. And that mother feels inclined to send the daughter to his house because he's paying the rent, he's paying the light bill, he's sending the child to school. And the mother is thinking, if I don't, then he is going to cut these things that's happening over here. It's also fear, right? When we talk about the gangs in Jamaica, crime is like that criminal activity, like, you know, that's one thing that the government is really trying to address, right? So when you look at the mix, right? And even when you're talking about trafficking, whether it's in the US or anywhere else, we can't forget that intersectionality, it's at the core. There is no such thing as a single issue. So when we're talking about trafficking, we have to be talking about homelessness. We have to be talking about gender inequality. We have to be talking about the LGBTQ community, right? There is no such thing as a single issue. So similar to the United States, do we still have those other issues that intersect with trafficking?
That makes a lot of sense. And one thing I want to circle back to is this idea of community involvement, right? Because there's a certain pervasiveness that can be unique, right? It's not just an intimate relationship with one individual that you described, like maybe a pimp or someone who individual believes is their boyfriend. It's your uncle, it's your mother, it's your brother, it's your, and so, wow, I appreciate that insight. So maybe diving a little, I know you spoke a little bit about shared hope. I know that you also work with Polaris.
Yes.
As a training manager, what are the things that you think that folks, when you're going into this work, when you're engaging with a survivor, maybe doing that initial intake for basic needs that we're addressing here, right? When we talk about those intersectional risks that people face, what would you suggest in terms of a trauma-informed approach?
I think I've been saying this for years. So first I want to say shout out to some of the people that I see that I know, like Katie Steinberg and Donna Bruce, who I see on here. So shout out to you guys. I've been saying this for years, and I'm going to continue saying it until I see that shift in the movement. Oftentimes when people hear about trafficking and they want to get involved, you have individuals who definitely is coming and addressing this issue from a good place, right? There's a pure heart. They want to get involved, that they want to help. But sometimes they show up with this cape, right? That they are Superman or Superwoman, and they're going to come and rescue someone, right? And with that cape, what comes with that is their own biases, right? Let me keep it calm today, right? But they have
you don't have to,
right? They have their own biases of what they think a victim or a survivor should look like, right? Because I can't tell you how many times I hear, you don't look like a victim of trafficking, I'm like, well, what's the victim supposed to look like, right? They have, their own ideologies or things that they want for the survivor. So kind of like taking control over the situation without giving the power and the control back to the survivor, right? So I would say if you're showing up to help a survivor, check your own stuff first, right? And we all have stuff, right? So whether you have been trafficked or there are other things that's going on in your life, we all show up with some stuff, but it's important to check those things. Check yourself to say, okay, am I ready? Have I gone through some healing, right? So if, let's say you're not a survivor of trafficking, but you're a survivor of domestic violence and you want to, this is your way of giving back. This is your way of helping, right? First, ask yourself, have I worked on my own healing? Right? And if I haven't worked on my own healing, let's take a step back, right? And address those things before getting involved in the work, because the good that I think that I'm doing, I can do more harm than actual good, right? Definitely speaking to, I gotta say this. I really gotta say this because I've been like, someone sent me a text on Saturday and it's been like, today's what, Thursday? It's been on my mind forever. Be intentional and really get a lot of training, right? And when you're coming into this work, I can't tell you how many people have reached out to me and said, I got one training on human trafficking and I'm ready to do this work. And I'm like, no, pump your brakes. 1 2-hour training does not prepare you to do this work, right? Get connected with some other agencies, right? But we have to be sure that when we say that we are serving with excellence, right? Excellence meaning we understand that survivors have been exploited. There's an individual who exploited this person for profit. As an agency, as an individual, we want to check ourselves to say, are we, in the name of doing good, re-exploiting this individual? Right? Are we, in the name of doing good, re-exploited this individual? On Saturday I was teaching, right? And my phone was blowing up, right? Like bang, 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 just going off. And I'm just like, what is happening in the world, right? I think I gave all the people in my circle, like, listen, for the month of March, it's my crazy month, 9 to 5 on Saturdays, I am teaching. My phone is going off. Gave the class a break, looked at my phone. A friend of mine is losing her mind because a reputable organization posted a survivor on their website. And in the article, it wasn't empowering at all, right? In the article, it went on to say, oh, this survivor has been in our program for a week. A week? And they're on your website, right? And it shared about like where she was, the different states that she was trafficked. It talked about in detail, her sexual experiences while being trafficked, right? And then in the end, it says, you can donate to our organization to help more survivors like this person. Her full name, her picture, and y'all can see why I'm still livid on a Thursday. Right? So when we're talking about HIPAA violations, we're talking about her safety. We're talking about how disempowering the article was written. And we're talking about this person in your care for a week. And they are on your website. And in the end, it's that call for money.
And I think that what it starts with is this idea of paternalism that I hear, because that's really what you're talking about, right? This idea of we know what's best. And although all of my good intentions are, what I need, is this exactly what a survivor is asking for? Is this what's going to empower him or her to that next level of self-actualization,
But it's not even that. Sometimes I feel like people have their own agendas, right? They have their own agendas. What can I do to make me look good, that I'm doing this in the community, when this is not what this work is about, right? You know, someone asked me the other day, they said, why don't you have more followers on your Instagram? And I said, because on my Instagram and on my social media, it's my family and friends, right? I don't show up to a speaking engagement and say, hey, follow me on Instagram. I don't know these people, right? So I keep that very small. For me, it is not about limelight. It's not about the lights, the camera, action. It's really about doing the work and making a difference in the life of someone. If I should die tomorrow, right? I don't care that I was on a website, or I was in a paper, or I was on television. What I care about is, how did I impact the life of someone else? What kind of legacy did I leave in this person? How did I empower this person to pick up the broken pieces and confidently go after their dreams? How did I guide this person to an opportunity? How did I let this person know there's a dark light at the end of the tunnel? How do I let this person know there is hope? Right? So all the other stuff, all the other glitz and you can save that for, like, miss me with that, right? But what I want to do, my intention for doing this work is to ensuring that I leave a legacy so that someone else feel like they can carry on. You too can do this, right? And I see Donna Bruce in the chat, like, yes, there is hope. Shout out to you, Donna. You're doing some amazing stuff too.
Yes. Hey, Donna. I really feel what you're saying, and it makes me wonder, because we see that whole, I call it woke culture, right? Of, I'm doing this, I'm involved in this movement. Is that something that we see in the Caribbean? Is that something that you see, maybe, is it generational, right? Is it younger folks who are kind of tapping into this social media clickbait of, I'm involved in this? Do you see that same trend happening, or are there differences just based on the culture that you see in the Caribbean?
So culturally, right? In the Caribbean, people are still trying to grasp that trafficking is happening, right? They're still trying to understand that definition, that this story is trafficking, right? Because they see that in a whole different way, right? But when you go in, so like when I'm doing trainings in the Caribbean and I'm explaining to them what trafficking is, right? I start off, how many of you think you've come into a situation like a case with trafficking? They're like, I'm here to learn about this, right? But by the end of the presentation, the attendees can tell me what kid in their class said something, what person in their community said something. They can tell me all these things, right? So that education and awareness is so important, right? And that's what we're seeing in the Caribbean, where we're trying to get individuals, right, on all levels, whether that's the guidance counselors, the teachers, community members, law enforcement, right, to really understand the complexity and what trafficking really is. What I love about Jamaica is that our law enforcement officers are intentional about learning and understanding trafficking, right? And even our prosecutors and judges, right? Working on a project right now where we have a judge who is leading the Caribbean Council of Judges to address trafficking, like teach them about trafficking. We have our law enforcement officers who are connected with Homeland Security, Interpol, right? Going to different parts of the world, not just the United States, but in Europe, and also learning about trafficking and getting training and bringing that back to Jamaica to apply. Right? Apply those principles and those learning techniques to properly investigate trafficking. We have our prosecutors. I've been on a panel with some of our prosecutors from Jamaica who understands this issue to the T. And when you bring a case before them, right, they will take that case. But as we know, with trafficking and prosecuting these cases, you know, it can be difficult. So I do want to say that with the education, like, we've been talking about trafficking now since 2000, right? And trafficking didn't start in 2000. We know trafficking dates back, right? There's stories of trafficking in the very Bible that some of us read, right? But when the UN held that convening back in 2000 and established the Palmero Protocol and charged states to go back to their countries and take action and do something, that's when we saw a lot of countries around the world trying to implement anti-trafficking legislation, right? And that continues to evolve over the years, right? Where we're seeing through education and awareness, right? We're not doing things the way we used to in 2000. Well, some of us, some people are still learning, right? And some people are like still, right? Because even last year, I got a call from a prosecutor's office wanting me to be an expert witness on a case. And I'm like, so this is how y'all going about this case? Hold up. The only way I'm going to be an expert on this case if I speak to you and your supervisor, because this is like the way they prosecuted cases back in 2000. We don't do this now, right? And so we still need, there's still that room for growth. We all, right, myself included, right? We all have that room for growth and doing better. But I see over the years that I've been in this movement for over 11 years, and when I first started the movement to where I see the movement now, it's not the same. Right? Number one, when I first started this movement and I was learning from our veteran survivor leaders like Marian Hatcher, right? Venita Carter, right? Audrey Morrissey, right? Kathleen Mitchell, some of our veteran survivor leaders who have been in this work and have paved the way for individuals like me, Rachel Lloyd. I learned from them that when they started this work, survivor leader, what, who is that, right? Survivor leaders weren't even invited at the table, right? There were decisions that were being made without them. And they were the ones who were in the trenches doing the work, right? But they were called upon, hey, can you share your story? That's when they were called upon. To now, where I see that thanks to Ming Dang, who is the CEO for Survivor Alliance, Ming Dang was the one who pushed for us to have a legislation where we now have a U.S. Advisory Council where you have survivors who are advising the White House. Thanks to Ming Dang for that. I can't not give people their flowers while they're here and educate people of even how that came about, right? So thanks to Ming Dang for pushing where we can see survivors, now survivor leaders, in a place where they're not just there sharing their story, because survivor leaders have so much more to offer than sharing their stories, but they're in a place where they feel empowered and they can give back and contribute to effectively address this issue.
I'm with you. I'm with you. And I'm just thinking, so we get lucky in the US sometimes. There's cities that seem to be a bit ahead of the curve. But when you were talking about the way that judges, prosecutors are really coordinating with one another to protect survivors, essentially, how do you think that what tips, tools, do's, don'ts do you think that we can employ here in the US, maybe in states that are less progressive in the movement, I'll say?
This is another line that I've been saying, I think, for the last 11 years. When we talk about trafficking, this is not a presidential issue. This is not a law enforcement issue. This is not an NGO issue. This is not a survivor issue. This is not a women's issue. This is a collective issue. This is a collective issue that is plaguing our communities, right, and our nation. So to effectively address this, there must be a collaborative approach, right? There must be a collaborative approach. I have gone to states where NGOs don't speak with law enforcement because they don't like how law enforcement go about their cases. And I'm like, wait, if you continue to operate in silos where you're not going to work with law enforcement because you don't like how they prosecute or they go about, their cases, how are we ever going to see a change? We got to work with these individuals and get them to understand, don't give up, right? The chief is not going to be there forever. Sadly to say, we all get old and die, right? So you're not going to be in that position forever. So if you're working with someone who doesn't get it, hey, let's keep working until that role changes. Right? But we have to collaborate. We got to speak. We got to work together. And we got to keep the survivors at the center. That should be who's at the center of our work. It shouldn't be about us and how many kudos that we can get. We shouldn't be pointing fingers to say, law enforcement needs to fix this. We need better legislation. We can have all the legislation we want, but the rule of law is not enough if someone isn't implementing that rule of law. Right? So we have to be collaborating. We have to find a way to meet in the middle. We're not all going to agree, right? We're not all going to agree on everything. But if I can meet you in a place where I say, you know what, I agree with you on this piece, and let us work on this piece to continue to bring about change effectively to address trafficking, let's continue to work. Right? Far too many times I'm hearing, I'm not going to work with this person because they're a Republican and they're a Democrat and Republicans think this. This is not a political issue. This issue is affecting lives, and we cannot use politics if we want to change lives.
Right. So I completely agree. And in terms of solutions, so collaboration, making sure we're not operating in silos, making sure that we're centering folks with lived experience is something that I feel that you've also raised. What is a solution? You have 3 solutions, right? You've knocked down 2 already. What is a solution that you've seen work or that you're starting to see some positive outcomes in terms of the initiatives that you've been working on lately?
Okay, so one of the things that I am absolutely proud of right now, and this is, we have seen safe harbor being passed, around the country in various states. But here in my state of Maryland, safe harbor, and for people who don't understand safe harbor, this is an alternative to children who are being trafficked. Instead of arresting these children who are being trafficked, and I'm talking about children under the age of 18 who are being trafficked, they are being offered services. Right. And 3 years ago, we began to, well, more than 3 years ago, Maryland began to address trying to implement some form of safe harbor legislation, right? 2 years ago, I remember working with Amanda Rodriguez, Jessica Emerson, Liz Kimball was our champion, Senator Susan Lee was the legislator, that was really pushing this. And we came close to implementing some form of safe harbor, and we had to make some decisions. Do we kill a bill, right, that doesn't have all the provisions that we want, or do we take a piece of the bill and implement it and continue to work, right? So, and that's what we decided to do, right? So that these youth, they can have something, right? And so this year, we went back to get that full safe harbor where they're getting all the provisions that's needed in that bill. And I can happily say that as of yesterday, it passed the House of Maryland, and we're now waiting for the Senate to say yes. And when I talk about this, people may say, well, that's just in Maryland. What happened to the rest of the country? Other states have safe harbor, like New York was the first state to implement safe harbor. Minnesota has safe harbor. But this is the push that we want, where we don't see children. We're talking about individuals under the age of 18 who cannot psychologically, developmentally consent to sex, who are being arrested as a direct result of their exploitation, of their trafficking, right? So that brings me joy to see that we're beginning to see that shift. It brings me joy to see where survivor leaders are leading the initiative. It brings me joy to see that we can have conversations like this. It brings me joy that both of us, you and I, Kyla, are having this conversation, right? Where before it would be like, no, it has to be a white, blue-eyed, blonde-eyed person, right? And we can't talk about trafficking if we're not going to talk about racism. Right? That's at the center. Even in anti-trafficking efforts, there is racism, right? I can't tell you how many times I got a call from a reporter asking, is there a white survivor that I can talk to? I can't tell you agencies that I've worked with that will say, I have to put a white survivor on my website to attract donors. Just Google human trafficking and look at the images that come up in Google. How many times do you see a person of color? Right? So we can't ignore race. And if you're offended that I'm talking about racism, maybe you need to check your stuff. I'm just saying. Right?
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
there's so much that so much that has improved over the last 20 years. We see law enforcement doing things differently. Right? There's a different way of addressing this issue. Do we still have work to do? Yes, we still have work to do, right? We see more legislation being introduced. For example, the TVPA, right? The Trafficking Victims Protection Act. When the Trafficking Victims Protection Act was implemented in 2000, many people don't know that it had nothing to do with US citizens. That legislation was implemented in 2000 to address foreign nationals. Now, as of today, 2022, well, it's not implemented yet, right? But each year for that TVPA, it must be reauthorized every 2 years, right? This year, right, Congress is looking to reauthorize, to change the timeline on that. And so instead of every 2 years, we're looking at every 5 years to reauthorize the TVPA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, right?
Also, Shamere, for a second, can we talk about the urgency of passing the Reauthorization Act? Because that's something here. I think we need to underline, bold that, exclamation mark.
A lot of people, and if you are on here, I see my mom is on here. Shout out to my mom and shout out to my cousin, Katie. A lot of people who, you may not be emerge into this issue in terms of this is not something that you pay attention to on an everyday basis, right? But I'm going to use my mom and my cousin as an example. They care about this issue carefully because I'm their daughter and their cousin, right? So they try to learn, they try to understand. If you should ask my mom or my cousin, right, hey, tell me about the TVPA. They would be like, what, who, what's happening, right? So the average person really doesn't understand that the TVPA was the first legislation in the US that gave us guiding principles as to how we should address this issue, right? And so states, when we talk about state laws that address trafficking, state laws adapted those principles off of the TVPA. What the TVPA does, right, is authorize funding to work on this issue. And if we don't have no funds, we can't work on it. Let's just be clear, right? We need money, right, to address this issue. I'm not going to dance around it. I'm not going to say like, well, that's obvious. No, we need money. And we're not talking about $1 million. Right? Because $1 million, I'm like, I remember one year sitting with appropriations and they were like, $1 million. And I said, is that for like one organization? Because it can't be for a state and it definitely can't be for the country, right? So we need like real money, right, to address this. And when we see that there is a stall in this passing of the TVPA, it really impacts NGOs and others who are trying to work on this issue, right? It is crucial to survivor services, it's crucial to funding, it's crucial to law enforcement. There are so many pieces why this piece of legislation is important. important. If you don't know, I mean, I could spend the next 20 minutes just talking about the TVPA, but for the sake of time and not wanting to like get more on the policy side, I would ask people to, I see Carol just posted a link in the chat to look more up on this, and it's now called the TVPRA, the Trafficking Victims Protection Reauthorization Act, right? Because each year it has to be reauthorized. So that's what that R stands for. So it's the TVPRA, right? But it's affectionately known as the TVPA, you know, when people are saying, okay, it's time to reauthorize the TVPA, right? And I remember when I first started doing this work and going on the Hill, I was asking the question, why on God's green earth do I have to go on the Hill every time we need to reauthorize the TVPA and go to legislators and say, hey, can you support the reauthorization of the TVPA? Right? It should be like a no-brainer, right? We're like, we know trafficking is wrong. We know that trafficking is happening in the United States. Why do we have to lobby to get this passed? Right?
Right.
See why I say politics shouldn't be the driving source, but I digress.
Exactly. And as you're talking about NGOs, these critical services, number one, thank you for emphasizing that, because it's essential to what we do at Amara. It's essential to, I kind of want to run through, because I think it's rare that we have someone that's really tapped into policy, but also works very closely with direct service providers. And so talking about the kind of empowerment, that survivors need, can you tell us about the organizations that you work with, that you support, or the kinds of tools that survivors need to really take hold of their lives again?
I work with several organizations. Like, people always ask me, where do you find time to do all the work that you do? So working with Polaris, that operates the National Human Trafficking Hotline, is my primary job, right? As the CEO of Sungate, I don't even take a salary from Sungate, because I believe every dollar that comes into Sungate should go back to survivors. So people are like, well, if you're the CEO, why are you working for someone else? So that every dollar that comes into my company can go back to survivors. So I'll go work for someone else. I'll do the double work so that survivors can have access to the things that they need. Right? So that's one of the things that I love, right? Just being able to teach people on how to help survivors when they call the hotline. Right? So that's one piece. At Sungate, understanding that education is an avenue of hope when we're talking about survivors, right? When we're talking about survivors rebuilding their lives, right? When we're talking about preventing re-trafficking, right? Because when people hear about this, people want to say, oh, I want to address this. But what about life after you come through that initial, when you're first extracted? What about life after that? Right? That's where Sungate comes in. Like, hey, you and whatever education looks like for you. At Sungate, we don't define education for the person, right? So whether that's college, trade school, beauty, right? Like, whatever education looks like for you, let's talk about that and let's get you on that path. Right? We have Sungate scholars, former Sungate scholars who are on this chat right now that can attest to that is what we do at Sungate. I work with Empower Her Network, where I'm still directly connected to survivors. Now, this is the part that gets me the most excited, right? When a survivor comes and I am, that first initial contact with the survivor, and they're like, hey, this is what I want to do, right? Or sometimes I remember meeting once with a survivor and they were like, why do you care? Aren't you just another organization who's just going to sell me this dream and not follow through? And I remember sitting in the Starbucks like, what? Like, how many people have failed this survivor? Why, like, in our first conversation, that's what came out to her. And I had to remind her that I care about you, not because of what you've been through, but because you're a human being and you deserve to be loved. You deserve access to the things that you need, right? And the universe would have it, the Lord will have it, that the following week I was able to connect with the landlord to get her housing, right? And so she was like, okay, you're about your business. Like, you know what you're doing. And that I had nothing to do with that. It just happened that the stars aligned, right? Where she was and through that, she was able to say, okay, I can work with you. And from working with this young lady, she went to get her own apartment, to not getting one job, but 2 jobs, going back to school, getting her real estate license, all within 18 months, might I add, right? So that is what brings me joy, just to see survivors coming in, and I am saying, I share it with them, like, listen, I know you can do it because I did it. And if I did it, you can do it too. What's stopping you? And I let these survivors know, listen, I'm your personal cheerleader. There's nothing that you can say that can hurt my feelings, right? I let them know upfront, we may bump heads at times because we're humans, and that's what happens in any human relationship. People bump heads at times, but there's nothing that you can say that's going to stop me from wanting to help you. There's nothing that you can say where I'm going to be like, delete, I don't want to work with this person anymore. I will forever try to connect you with services, help you attain those dreams, whatever I can do. And if I don't have the resources, I'm going to find somebody that can. I'm working with a survivor right now. And I tell the survivors that come into Empower Her Network, I'm not a case manager. I don't do case management. I just have pom-poms. I'm your cheerleader to show up and do high kicks and backflips when you achieve those dreams. And I have a survivor that I'm working with right now. Everything that's happening in her life, she will call me. Right. And I'm like, what, why? Have you spoken to your case manager about this? And she's like, why? My case manager don't know. I know if I call you, you're going to get it done. I'm like, okay, let's establish some boundaries. I don't have all the answers, but it just so happened that because I am the co-chair for the Victim Services Committee, I know the agencies that are doing these things. So when she will call me, I'll be like, oh, call so-and-so, they work on that. So in her mind, Shamere has all the answers, and I'm trying to tell her, no, I don't. Your case manager can help you too, and just trying to connect that. My other pride and joy is the Maryland Survivor Network.
Yes, I wasn't going to let you forget them.
Other pride and joy. There was another network, and when I first got into doing this work, just so everyone know, when I first joined this work 11 years ago, the way that I was treated by some survivor leaders, I was like, whoa, right? I thought like we can all come together, hold hands and sing Kumbaya, right? And we're supposed to take care of each other, right? But my first initial encounter with that one survivor leader, I didn't get that. And I used that as a guide and as example to say, this is not how I'm going to operate. I'm going to be the one to make the difference to help other survivors. And as I connected with other veteran survivor leaders and saw how they took me under their wing and guide me, I was like, yeah, this is how it's supposed to be. And I want to continue that. So there was another survivor network, and survivors who were in there, I would share things about professional development, and the person who started that was like, this is not what this network is about, right? And I realized survivors started to leave. And so I reached out to one, I was like, what is happening? And that person, and I share this publicly, she knows, Liz Kimball said to me, these are the things that I want. These are the things that I'm looking for in a network. And I made a promise to Liz Kimball that I will create the space for you to have these things that you want, right? It took me 2 years, because if you heard of all these things that I'm doing, right? It took me 2 years to actually create this network, right? But I had Liz in mind. I'm like, this is one person who's telling me they want these things. So I'm going to create that space. Also in Maryland, what I found that because people knew that I was a survivor leader, they were calling on me for a lot of things. And I was like, hold up, pump your brakes. Did you know that there's this other person over here that can help you with that? And they're like, well, we don't know. So the other part of creating the network was that so other survivors can be involved in this work. right? And they can have some help and guidance and assistance as to how you navigate this. Because as a survivor leader coming in, it can look crazy, especially when your first introduction to the field is through re-exploitation, right? So the Maryland Survivor Network was created for both personal and professional development, right? When I say I love, they are family to me in this network, right? Like the connections that are made, right? We had a meeting just last Sunday, and it was an in-person meeting, and I was just sitting back looking at how, you know, the connections are made, and I'm saying to myself, this is why this network was created. Another survivor was like, this is exactly why this network was created, to show that there is strength. We're not competing with each other. There's no competition in the network, right? Like, we are able to come together, celebrate each other's successes, provide opportunities for each other, right? I was in a meeting just this week, and I said to, I got connected because they knew that I did this work in Maryland. I was like, hey, we wanted the Maryland Survivor Network to do this. And I said, yeah, I'm not going to be the only one in the meeting. I'm bringing 2 people from our executive team with me, right? And those 2 people came in, and I was late for the meeting, and they spoke. And at the end, and I said, hey guys, just so you know, for this presentation, I will not be the person speaking for the network. Someone else from the network will be speaking, because I want to take a step back, right? I have been presented with so many opportunities over the years. I want to take a step back and provide those same opportunities for other survivors who want to do it, right? And that's what we need to see. We need to see that collaboration amongst survivors. Because I can tell you, in other states that I've been, I have seen where a reformed trafficker come in and created division among survivors. And that's not in the Maryland Survivor Network, right? I can attest, we see it. There were people in the network at our meeting on Sunday just saying that's what they love about this network. We celebrate each other. We come together. We talk to each other. There's that, oh, this is mine and I am whatever. Like, that's what we did in the life. In the life, it was that competition to get that money. Now we are here. We are really living a life now where we can celebrate and empower each other, guide each other, and help each other any way, shape, or form, right? Another beautiful thing about the network, just to show how much we are in collaboration, to join the network, everyone in the network has to approve of you. And there's a reason for that. Safety first. And 2, if there are any disagreements, let's talk about that and settle those disagreements instead of bringing those disagreements into the space, right? And having hard conversations can be difficult. But I believe that, you know, we don't all get along, right? But we can definitely come together and say, you know what? These are my views. These are your views. How can we work together for the greater good?
Yep.
Right? And that's what the network is about.
Oh my gosh, I feel bad because I took up all of the question time, but I really wanted folks to hear about the Maryland Survivor Network, about Empower Her, about Polaris, about you, and the way that you kind of have to mix these approaches. It can't just be we're informing police officers and hands off. We're giving basic need services and then hands off. It's really an investment in the individual and not this, you know, the sexualization, right, or the fantasization of survivors. So I'm so moved. I do want to leave time for questions. But first, I do want to echo just all of the love that you're getting in the chat. Katie Ann, was expressing how much of a blessing you are. Another individual was just wishing that God continues to bless you. Eva Sanchez agrees that collaboration and partnerships are incredibly important in this work. And Leilani also agrees that competition really does tear folks apart. Mm-hmm. So the first question that we have, and I know you spoke to this a little bit, but really maybe in like a step, what's the first thing that someone can do who is interested in supporting survivors but has really heard what you've said in terms of how to do it without being exploitive? how should someone go about getting started?
Partner with an agency. Partner with an agency and get some training, right? Because as I said, we all have good intentions, right? But even with me doing this work, I've made some mistakes along the way, right? Because I still have to learn. There's still pieces that I have to learn in doing this work, right? But I can own that I've made a mistake, and I can own that I'm going to get training. Like, I have gotten training to address that. I am still working on my healing, still in therapy, working through that part where I can do this work. So get connected with an agency before you even start working with survivors, right? Work with like youth, right? Work with someone who hasn't gone through trafficking and see what that experience is like. And I say youth for a reason, because I love working with youth. They teach you so many things. And if you can get through that, right, try working and mentoring someone who hasn't gone through trauma, right? And then say, okay, I got through this. Let me educate yourself, right? Become educated and aware on this issue. And, you know, I used to sit on the board for this organization in Chicago. And before this organization even became a thing, their CEO took 5 years of attending every training that she could, connecting with everyone in the movement that she possibly could before she decided to open her organization. And that to me is a great example, taking the time to really get to learn, to hear from others, to connect with others. What are some of the mistakes that you made along the way? What are some of the things that I shouldn't do? And really understanding trauma, because a lot of people don't understand trauma, right? That, hey, trauma can manifest in so many ways. I remember younger Shamere, I used to cuss you out in a heartbeat. You say the wrong things, I would flip the whole kitchen sink. Right? So now I could be like, okay, that person may have experienced some trauma. Let me approach it differently. Right? So get connected. There's so many trainings. There's so many resources out there. Read about this issue. There are books out there that's written by survivors. Right? We have Rebecca Bender that has written a book, and I am definitely promoting this new book here. This one is written by Leslie King, When Angels Fight, and she shares her story. When Angels Fight, maybe I should take off the blur of my background so that you guys can really see the book. This one is When Angels Fight by Leslie King, right? There's so many books out there that are written by survivors. Please read them, check them out, right? Learn from, and hear from survivors, connect with survivors, right? That's why we have the Maryland Survivor Network. Reach out to us, ask us, how can I help? How can I connect? Volunteer with organizations. Listen, we all have these gifts, skills, and talents. And you were not blessed with these skills, gifts, and talents to keep it to yourself. You can lend these skills, gifts, and talents to organizations, right? Organizations need a lot. Right now, I need a graphic designer. Right? People need lawyers, dentists. You know, yesterday I went to clean my teeth. Don't they look beautiful, Carla?
Yes, I love it.
All for Amara Legal, right? I said, listen, I'm going to do this thing. Hey, dentist, let's get the teeth clean, right? So I'm sitting there and just talking to her about trafficking. And this dentist has like the tool in her hand, like my mouth wide open. And we are there talking about how she can give back to trafficking. And I'm like, this is my life. I could lay back in a dental chair, mouth wide open, dentists have the tool in hand, and talk to her about trafficking. And like, we had like a whole 5-minute conversation. And I'm like, yeah, let's get back to the cleaning, because I'm sure you have other patients, right? That's what we live for.
I love that. And while you're talking about self-care, before I let you go, you are so busy, and as Ava says in the chat, you are a pioneer, okay? What are the self-care tips that you use to kind of energize yourself? Can you close us out with that? What's your self-care?
I have a passion planner, okay? This is my passion planner. Every year I have a passion planner. And in my passion planner, I write out my self-care. I write out my daily self-care, weekly self-care, monthly self-care, quarterly self-care, and yearly. So self-care for me, it's not just about the physical, it's the spiritual, it's the emotional. Coming on here talking to you today, I was like, I don't know where the conversation may go. So I have a candle burning that's giving off this sweet citrus aroma in my home, right? I start each morning with prayer and worship, right? Reading the Bible and in worship, listening to gospel. That's how I set my day. Before I go to my bed, I must watch a funny video on YouTube. Right? After the craziness that comes in, like I gotta watch something funny, right? When I'm not working, I'm giggling and being crazy, silly Shamere. If you are in my close circle, they're like, oh my gosh, she is just crazy, right? Because I know sometimes when people are going through, they don't always share that they're going through. So me, if I can make somebody laugh at my expense, why not? So I'll do something silly and funny just to make somebody else laugh. Weekly, every Sunday, I do a soaking in my tub with bath bombs and stuff like that. Monthly, I have a membership with Massage Envy. So every month I go and I get a massage. Quarterly, every quarter, I try to take off at least one day from work.
You need more than a quarter, but that's okay. Okay.
Right? But at least, okay, you know how many people have vacation that they have stored up? No, at least once every quarter, I take off a day from work. Right? And then yearly, I try to leave the country at least once a year.
Love it.
Right?
Love it.
So definitely be intentional about self-care. You cannot pour from an empty cup. If you are not taking care of yourself, you cannot serve others.
I love that. And I think I've heard the empty cup metaphor before, but it's serving others. How can you expect to be able to do it when you're not giving yourself that love? So thank you so much. Everyone who's listening, she gave out so many self-care tips that one of them is sure to be a good fit for you. Thank you so much, Shamere. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for being our Circle of Hope speaker. And we hope to connect with you again soon.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Shout out to my mom again for joining.
Yeah, shout out, Mom. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Bye.